Awesome. So my name's Caley Shoemaker. I'm the head distiller for Hangar 1. We're up in Alameda, California on the former Naval Air Station, so just up the way. I'm actually relatively new to California. I moved here to join Hangar 1 about 3 years ago from Denver, Colorado. I actually started distilling at Stranahan's Colorado Whiskey in Denver. Go Broncos. I like that shirt. So I started my career in whiskey, and the time that I spent making whiskey, I really had an opportunity to learn pretty much every aspect of distillation. Everything from tours and tastings to grain selection to mashing, fermenting, distilling, barrel maturation, bottling. There's so many awesome aspects that go into making delicious, delicious beverages. But when I had the opportunity to come join Hangar 1 here in the Bay Area, I was really excited. Hangar 1's a brand that's really well known for using fresh ingredients and partnering with local farmers to source those ingredients. And that was something that I found really exciting, intriguing, and that would be a great challenge. So here at Hangar 1, where I am now, working with our local communities and local farmers is pretty much at the center of everything we do. We source grain and wine from local folks. We work with farmers throughout California to source the fruits and botanicals for our flavored vodka. And we even get some water from our friendly neighborhood Fog for Fog Point. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Part of this collaboration with local suppliers leads to partnerships with like-minded individuals. So Chris is with me here today. Chris is from FogQuest, and he'll talk a little bit about fog and fog water and how we use fog to make vodka. But what we're going to touch on today is a few things. We're going to talk a little bit about innovation in vodka, innovation in distilling, and our most recent innovation at Hangar 1, Fog Point Vodka. All right, so before I get too crazy talking about Fog Point, you guys probably would like to know how vodka is made, right? A lot of people have this perception of vodka being a spirit that's vodka because it comes from potatoes. This is not actually the case. Vodka can be made from just about anything. If it can be fermented to create alcohol, it can be made into vodka. So there are grain vodkas out there. There's corn vodka, there's fruit vodka, there's even a guy making vodka from milk. So people get really creative with it. Basically, the way to make vodka is you start with your fermented material, and then you need to distill it to 190 proof. 190 proof is 95% alcohol. It's pretty spicy stuff, right? The idea is to reach towards a clean, odorless, flavorless profile. That's actually in the federal definition. We don't want it to be 100% odorless and flavorless. We want to have a nod to our starting ingredients. We put a lot of work into sourcing really good stuff. We want you to be able to taste it. So the 5% water that sneaks through with that 95% alcohol, it's going to carry through a little bit of character from our starting ingredients. And at Hangar 1, that's Midwestern grains and California wine grapes. So you guys just saw a picture of the still behind me. We've also got a photo right here. Distilling in a nutshell is the act of boiling our fermented material. So if we're using California wine grapes, in our case, that's wine. And as we boil that material, the alcohol portion of it has a lower boiling point than the water, which means that the alcohol steam is going to rise up off that solution before the water, allowing us to collect it and condense it back down into more pure liquid alcohol. Now you see this still behind me. It's got a lot of little windows and things on it. We have to get to 190 proof. It's a pretty important part of being vodka. So that doesn't look like a whiskey still. That's specifically a vodka still. The reason it is specifically a vodka still is because the towers next to the pot contain a series of small chambers. That's what those windows represent, as small chambers. And in each of those chambers, the vodka is forced to go from a liquid to a gas to a liquid to a gas, each time leaving behind more water, leaving behind impurities, and making its way to the collection tanks at the end at 190 proof. Now, distilling is what people think about when they think about making vodka, right? Distilling is the most important part. Crazy thing is, if we're distilling up to 190 proof, you guys want to drink it at that high of a proof, right? So we have to add water. Water is actually 60% of vodka. We're going to add water back into our vodka to bring it down to that bottle strength. So there's actually more water in your alcohol than there is alcohol a lot of the times. Another fun party fact you can share with your friends. So for most of our vodkas, our straight vodka and all of our fruit vodkas, we're using reverse osmosis water. Reverse osmosis water is so clean that it allows our ingredients to shine. It allows all of the different nuances in the flavor profile of these awesome ingredients we're using to shine. And through using RO water, that was one of those things that started to inspire me to look at our water usage. and make something like Fog Point. I'll get there in a few, though. I was talking about our fruit and our wine, and that's been one of my favorite parts of moving from whiskey and moving from Colorado to California is our collaboration with our local farmers. When I first got here and I saw all of the really interesting produce that's at the farmers market year-round, it inspires us to continue to make new vodkas, and our partnership with those farmers as we do this is so integral to everything that we do. And the drought has had a huge, huge impact on our farmers. So this is a really important time for us to talk about water and drought and the water cycle and its impact on everything we do in California. So the drought officially ended in March. I know the rain was terrible and we're all very tired of it, but it helped us to get out of this 6-year drought cycle. That, over the course of the last 6 years, has caused a lot of impact on California. For example, last year the drought cost California $3 million, and 102 million trees died over the course of that 6-year drought period. So that's a little bit of the impact globally, but the farmers are really paying the heavy price on this drought. It's important to remember that California is an agricultural center for the US. It's our biggest agricultural producer. There's more than 200 crops grown in California. So drought and farmers definitely go hand in hand. The thing that I kept hearing as we were talking with our farmers, as we're sourcing our fruits for our vodkas, is how the drought is impacting all of our fruit quality and our fruit availability. Plus, it's impacting me because I need water to make my vodka. Like I said, there's 60% water in vodka. Water adds to the overall character of what we're making. So the final package of a vodka is that distillate. You know, we've distilled up to 190 proof. Any process that we do. So any infusion or maceration of our fruits or botanicals if we're making a flavored expression, and then of course water. The characteristic of the water is going to have a huge impact on the final product. So the good news as we're talking about water and these water issues is that here in California, as a community, we like to all innovate as a group to find solutions to these problems. So individuals, businesses, we're all committed to chipping in and making our state a better place and helping sustainability. So we tried to do the same thing at Hangar 1. As a group, we started looking for a new, more sustainable source of water. What's a way that we could talk about this issue, raise awareness for the water crisis we were having during the drought, and make a really tasty vodka at the same time? That was our end goal. So we searched for all kinds of different processes. And in that search, someone from our team came across FogQuest. Now, FogQuest is a nonprofit that works worldwide to collect fog for agricultural and drinking water use. They work in countries like Chile, Nepal, Guatemala. It sounds really cool. And we realized that fog is so iconic here in the Bay Area. The solution for our water issue was actually right in front of us this whole time, right? The question is, could we actually use fog to make vodka? Sounds like a really cool idea. Is it actually something we can do? So we decided to reach out to the experts at FogQuest. So Chris here is our local fog expert. Chris has been volunteering with FogQuest for the last 4 years, and he has been instrumental in this project for us. I've actually learned so much visiting the fog collectors with Chris and learning about how fog's created in California and how's a way that we might be able to collect it. So Chris, tell us a little bit about fog, please.
Excellent. Hi. Like Caley said, I'm a volunteer with the charity FogQuest Sustainable Water Solutions. And FogQuest's mission is to provide water to people in remote locations using fog. And right now, FogQuest has projects in 8 countries supplying significant amount of water. Now, like Caley said, they brought me here to explain a little bit about the fog because it's kind of bewildering. And I want to try to explain how this mechanism works. And the first question I want to answer is, what is the fog? And out here in the Bay Area, the most prolific kind of fog that we see is the fog from the ocean. That fog comes off the ocean. And that is technically called advection fog. And advection means movement. And so the way the fog is generated from the ocean is warm air moves across the cool ocean. And as that air is cooled, it cannot hold as much water. So the air becomes super saturated. And then as the air cools even further, water droplets are formed. So that's the mechanism for generating fog, for generating ocean fog. And this ocean fog is the starting point for fog collection in most areas. And in one area where FogQuest has the largest network of fog collectors, it's in a remote village in Guatemala, the advection fog is the starting point. In this village, FogQuest has around 35 large fog collectors, and that occupies a collection surface of around 15,000 square feet. So that's about a third of a football field, vertically posted like billboards, and those collectors produce around 1,800 gallons of water a day during the dry season. This network by FogQuest, it's a minimalist network. It's designed to be rather inexpensive, and also it's a passive technology, and so it doesn't require any energy. And so for the people of this one village, the fog is a very positive aspect in their life. Now, out here in the Bay Area, people have a little more mixed feelings about the fog. Sometimes the fog will cause traffic delays or airport delays, but also during the summertime, the fog can cool off an entire city or an entire county. And so if you think about it, for the fog to have an impact over a square miles, there's a lot of energy in the fog. There's a lot of cold water. It's just difficult to acquire that water. So I hope that helps a little bit. Now, the process for fog collection is pretty straightforward. What has to happen is fog has to be blown through a mesh for several hours. And then water is trapped on the mesh, and it's eventually collected in a tank. So I want to explain a little bit more about why this works, and the starting point to understanding why this system works is I can explain a little bit more about fog. And the most important aspect of fog is that the droplets in fog are microscopic. They're about 100 times smaller than a raindrop. So raindrops, their trajectory usually is vertical. They're falling from the cloud to the ground. Fog droplets tend to float. They move horizontally. So any fog collectors will be posted in a vertical fashion to try and maximize the fog going through the material. So the process, like I said, it's pretty straightforward. Fog droplets impact the mesh, then they get trapped and they stop moving. And over time, the mesh becomes waterlogged, and then larger droplets fall from the mesh into a trough and then into a collection tank. So basically, what these fog collectors are doing is they're converting the small microscopic droplets in fog into larger droplets, which we can then plumb into a tank. And one tool that fog researchers use is called the standard fog collector. A standard fog collector can measure the fog collection efficiency in a particular area. And last year, for the Fog Vodka project, we mainly use these standard fog collectors. Also, the researchers commonly use them. And from June through September, this one small fog collector averaged over a gallon a day, produced over a gallon a day during the fog season at Sutro Tower. Now, these standard fog collectors, because researchers use them, they're made to standard specifications and standard sizes. The main component on the fog collector is a 1 square meter metal frame. And then that metal frame is wrapped in a specific type of shade cloth. There's 2 layers of shade cloth that go over the metal frame. That makes up the fog collection panel. Then the fog collection panel is lifted 2 meters off the ground. It's also anchored in place with guy wires. The shade cloth that we use for the standard fog collectors was studied for around 10 years, and it was this particular shade cloth with a Rochelle weave and a 35% shade coefficient was determined to be the most optimum material for fog collection at high elevations. And if you look at the shade cloth, it's a little hard to see right here, but the Rochelle weave forms a triangle, and that facilitates water shedding off the material. And also that triangle pattern is similar to the branch and needle structure on redwood trees. It's very similar. So there's a lot of biomimicry going on in fog collection. And a big topic of research is a lot of researchers and schools are trying to develop materials which are more efficient than the standard fog collection material. And for this project, for this upcoming year, we have several standard fog collectors that we're using, and we're also using a larger fog collector with one of these more exotic materials. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
So we learned a ton from working with FogQuest FogQuest and Chris. And it turns out that fog collection is actually like the perfect Bay Area solution to our Bay Area water problem. So we worked with Chris and FogQuest to build and strategically place these fog collectors throughout the Bay. Now, Chris is monitoring 3 fog collectors at Sutro Tower. This is actually a photo of one of our collectors you can see at the base of the tower. And then we have the fog farm that was recently installed at a farm in Half Moon Bay. Chris, can you tell us why fog collectors at Sutro Tower make sense?
Sure. Yeah, well, to do fog collection successfully, it does require a very specific set of geographic characteristics be met. And one thing that's a little counterintuitive is we're using the advection fog, the ocean fog, but the main criteria that FogQuest requires is the fog collector should be placed at around 2/3 the height of the fog bank. So in the Bay Area, that means generally around 1,000 feet up. And this is because the fog collection is passive, the fog, an additional condensation step is required. And as the fog from the ocean travels up the hill, more condensation occurs and the fog becomes more water dense. So that's one requirement. Another requirement is proximity to the ocean. It's generally recommended that the fog collectors should be installed within 5 miles of the ocean. And another requirement is generally a free path for the fog to go from the ocean to the net. Now, these characteristics in the Bay Area are very difficult to reach because we have real estate and vegetation that's always occupying space. So it's really a matter of compromises. Other important factors that we look at when we're seeing if fog collecting will work is if there's a change in the plant ecology, if there's really lush green ferns or a lot of moss on a tree during the summertime, it's pretty likely there's going to be fog in that area. Also, you can use just physical examples, like if you're driving through an area and you have to turn on your windshield wipers, that's an area that has a lot of fog. And another cue is from nature. We can study the fog drip that comes off of trees. And if there's a significant amount of water under a tree, that's a good clue that fog collection will work. And to really to combine all these characteristics, I've noticed that one tool the researchers use is Google Earth, because it can pull up the elevation, the proximity to the ocean, and you can see the obstacles. So that's pretty interesting.
Awesome. So last summer, Sutro Tower's fog collectors were able to collect about 350 gallons during the high fog season. So just a little idea of how much water we can get. So it's now time for a little bit of audience participation. You guys have all got a vial with you. This is a sample of the water collected at Sutro Tower over the last couple of days. So I'd like to take this opportunity to taste this fog water so we can understand how the flavor of this water impacts the final flavor profile of the vodka. And we'll taste the vodka in just a moment. So go ahead and give this water a sip. So the water's collected, it's brought to the hangar in tanks. We then carbon filter it, boil it, and carbon filter it a second time. Now, the filtration step's really important because we are collecting fog in these nice, beautiful nature areas that have things like leaves and dust that might be able to fall into the fog tank. So we want to remove any of those particulates. We then boil to ensure the water is sanitary and just filter one more time to make sure it's nice and clean. Once we've been through these steps, we send the water out to a laboratory for analysis. And it turns out that the fog water is actually cleaner than the average tap water in the Bay Area. However, as you guys are tasting it, you'll notice it does have its own character to it. So the thing that I really like about the water is that mineral note that you get there. It reminds me a lot of hiking. I'm really into hiking, and when you're outside on a nice warm day after a damp morning or a rainstorm, and you can smell the warm, wet stones of like a river or something as you're crossing by, that's exactly what the fog water reminds me of. It also has a slight salty mineral characteristic to it. I don't know if that comes from the ocean. I like to think that it does. Awesome. So we've talked a lot about the water. What are we distilling to make this vodka? We're using wine. We decided to partner with Bonnie Doon Vineyards because we decided if we're going to make this a sustainable vodka, if we're going to do this, we want to really do it. Now, Randall Graham and the Bonnie Doon team really inspired me with their winemaking techniques. They're huge into sustainable biodynamic farming. When I'm talking about biodynamic farming, I'm talking about synchronizing the viticultural process with the natural cycles of the plants and of nature, so that it's a low-impact, natural way to farm. Things like bringing in symbiotic plants and animals to augment the growing conditions of the grapes instead of using artificial elements, things like fertilizers and pesticides. So we have these really great, sustainable, delicious grapes that are turned into a wine, as Randall puts it, with minimal human intervention. So we Worked with the entire 2012 vintage of Bonnie Doon's Le Cigar Blanc wine. This is a white wine blend that's made of Pique Pool, Roussanne, and Grenache Blanc. We brought all of the wine to the distillery and distilled it up to 190 proof, and then used nothing but pure California caught fog water to cut that vodka back down to 80 proof, and poof, Fog Point vodka. This delicious stuff, which you guys all happen to have a taste of. So now the moment you've been waiting for. We've been talking all morning. You're here to taste vodka. So when I'm tasting a vodka, I like to start with nosing it. Okay, it gives my mind and my palate a preview of what's about to happen. You guys don't need to swirl this. I know we're all very used to wine tasting, but there's a lot more alcohol in here than there is in a wine, and swirling it is going to make that volatile alcohol rise up off the surface. So when you nose it, you'll get less of the lovely notes and a lot more alcohol. So no swirling, but go ahead and take a nose. Breathe in through your nose and mouth at the same time. That aerates that alcohol scent a little bit so you can start to notice the characteristics coming off of the vodka. Now you can smell that mineraliness you get from the water, but there's also a little bit of floral characteristic, also a little bit of sweetness. Next, go ahead and take a small sip from your vodka. This is going to prime your palate and cleanse it. Saw some of you guys eating salads back there. You don't want your vodka to taste like salad. So this step will go ahead and cleanse and get you ready. And on the next sip, take a slightly larger sip and allow yourself to really experience the texture of the vodka, the nice round mouthfeel, and all those flavor notes will start to come out. Floral notes, sweetness. Making a vodka from 100% wine was something I was really excited to do. Our straight vodka combines a grain and grape profile to make a really interesting, complex expression, but so much of that sweetness and that softness comes from the grape. So to have 100% grape vodka makes for a really, dare I say, robust flavored vodka. All right. After vodka tasting, a little bit of fun factoids about Fog Point. So we used a vintage of wine and all the fog water we could collect for 6 months. And in doing that, we were able to make 2,472 bottles of Fog Point. So this is a really limited edition vodka. We released it here in California and in a couple select areas throughout the country, and the response was awesome. It was really exciting to see spirits nerds and people that are really into the distilling industry like it, but to see average people really getting into it too. Everyone across the board thought this was a really cool idea, and I think it really brought forth a conversation about water conservation and collecting fog. We created bar programs with different bartenders throughout the country to make Fog Point martinis. We actually just enjoyed one right by the Bay Bridge over there at Epic Steakhouse yesterday. Really delicious way to taste the vodka. And that salty characteristic makes it pair really well with seafood, which is perfect because we have a lot of that here in the Bay Area. The last fun note is that we donated the profits from Fog Point sales back to FogQuest and to other water conservation organizations to push this conversation forward and help facilitate more research into how fog collection could become a viable solution for some of this water crisis that we've been experiencing. And I understand that it really has pushed the conversation forward.
Yes, because of this project, I've been introduced to numerous groups of researchers, and they're interested more in talking with Hangar One because they're so supportive of that community. We've also met some businesses that are using fog. I'll talk about them in a bit, but some of the researchers that Hangar One has now been associated with are out of the USGS. The Alicia Torregrosa, she works in the Western Regional Science Center down the street at Menlo Park. And one aspect of her research is to compile satellite data over several years during the summertime. And she overlays those satellite images and is able to get an estimate of the approximate fog and low coastal cloud concentrations in an area. This is a real good tool, a good starting point for fog researchers. And this map is of the Point Reyes area. And if you're familiar with kind of the North Bay, you can see that the white parts are kind of in the Marin headlands and then up by Point Reyes. And once again, if we were to cross this map with the other characteristics, especially using Google Earth, we're able to pinpoint locations much better. Other researchers that we've met include ecologists and botanists. Some ecologists are studying the fog drip off of trees, and they found that it's in some locations, especially on the ridgeline above Half Moon Bay, that the fog drip off of trees can account for twice as much water as comes during the rainy season. This image here is an image from Alicia Torregrosa's standard fog collectors up in the Mid-Peninsula research area. And what she has there is, like I said, researchers are trying to study different mesh to see which ones are more effective. And so she has an array up. And there's going to be a journal article out shortly combining this evaluation along with several other evaluations along the coast of California. But what's really fascinating is we met a botanist who was doing research out of Santa Barbara, and she set up some standard fog collectors at a strawberry farm and other biology type equipment, and she was able to measure how efficiently plants were transporting water and doing photosynthesis. And she was able to prove that after a fog event at these particular strawberry farms, the strawberries required less water to thrive. And that's really interesting, especially if we combine that fact with Alicia Torregrosa's maps, where they show that Salinas Valley, where there's a lot of these lettuce and strawberry farms, that's prime fog area. So there's a lot of interesting studies of fog, not really related to collecting the water, but ecologists are studying it and botanists are studying it, and also toxicologists are studying it. So now some of the businesses we've met with this project include a guy who sold Hangar 1, the first ever fog collector of this style in the United States. We met Michael Donahue with this company Fog 2H2O, and he is a distributor of this German engineered style fog collector, which has been trademarked and branded the Cloudfisher fog collectors. They use, like I say, a more exotic mesh, and they have an aspect of German engineering where they're more robust than the FogQuest fog collectors, but there's also more money involved in the material. So it's interesting to see the different charities compete for one's a highly engineered device and one's more of a minimalist device. Now those fog collectors that we saw have been installed successfully in Morocco. And in 2018, with the support of a couple of Moroccan charities and the support of a German government, these Cloudfisher style fog collectors are estimated to be the new largest fog collector network. They're supposed to be larger than the one FogQuest has up in Guatemala. So it'll be interesting to see if they can accomplish that by 2018. So through talking with these researchers and these businesses, I really think that FogPoint has established a dialogue, and it'll be interesting to see where we go forward from here with water conservation and fog studies and the work on the farms.
Yeah. Very cool. Awesome. So a little bit in closing, I hope you guys can see that innovation and fresh thinking are at the center of pretty much everything we do at Hangar 1. So we were so excited to be invited to Google. Google is thought of as a really progressive company that's on the forefront of human ingenuity, I would say. And so it's really exciting to be able to come here and talk to you guys about FogPoint. I hope I've changed your perception of what you're drinking. So next time you're out at happy hour, you can think about how much water is in this vodka and where did it come from? We do welcome your thoughts, though. We're always innovating. We're always looking for new ways to make vodka and new things to make vodka from. So please feel free to reach out to me if you guys have any ideas about any sort of fun projects we could go forth on and any issues we could address in the vodka making world. I'd also lastly like to invite all of you, we passed a little card, but please come visit us at the Distillery. We're located just up the way at the Alameda Naval Air Station. And we'd love to have you so you can see our equipment, learn about our process, taste FogPoint, Hangar 1, and some of our limited edition vodkas. So thank you guys very much. I'd like to open it up for questions if anyone has any questions. Yes, it's a great question.
Well, like I said, the researchers from Stanford are trying to study the characteristics which produce a lot of fog drip. And so they were at that stage in 2015. I know the research is ongoing. Now, I'm not sure what you mean by what the impact on the ecosystem is. What the researchers are able to do other than study the fog drip is they're able to do an isotope analysis of the water table from well water, and they can identify how much of the water recently came from fog and how much of the water came from rain. And there has been, once again, a surprising, in some watersheds, especially along the coast, I'm talking about like the Crystal Springs watershed, just east of Half Moon Bay, the isotope analysis of that water table shows that the fog has a very significant impact on that watershed. Yeah, well, that's a good question. Of course, if you were to layer fog nets everywhere, it could have an impact, but generally, the fog is so spread out, and it does encompass such a high and wide area that it would be difficult to remove a large amount of water. But an obvious thing to do, and the reason I think that the USGS is involved in mapping this out, is they could potentially regulate it and set up a permit system so people were removing the water in a sustainable manner.
Isn't the fog that you get near the bay, wouldn't it have salt in it? Or does...
Well, certainly there's an impact on the fog from the wave breaking action, and that does introduce different chemicals into the fog. Now, as the fog travels up a hill, like I say, FogQuest recommends installing the fog nets at a high elevation. Most of the impurities in the fog drop out. And in order to provide water to these remote communities, the fog water had to be tested, and it's been tested for decades, and it meets the criteria set by the UN for clean water, especially compared to groundwater in some of these more remote areas. But yeah, there is an impact there, and it's due mainly to the wave action. That's the point of exposure. That's where the fog changes characteristics, is right when it crosses the beach.
Very interesting.
So how much water does a single catcher get on a good day, I guess?
Yeah, like Sutro Tower, I think, is a good optimum location in the Bay Area. And last summer, during our heavy fog period, it averaged just over a gallon per day. And that's 1 square meter. Usually they're measured in gallons or liters per day per square meter. So a little over 4 liters per day.
We put up a standard fog collector at the distillery in Alameda as well, mainly because people want to see them, but also we were kind of interested in how much water we would collect. We get about a half a liter a day, maybe a liter on a really good day. So we use it to help water plants, but we're not in the optimal area like Sutro Tower.
Does the distillery make any naturally flavored vodkas?
Yes, all of our vodkas are naturally flavored. So any of our flavored vodkas that you will taste are made by macerating fruits and botanicals in 190 proof spirit. We then save that infusion and take the fruit out. And if you've ever made infused vodka at home, you know that when you take the fruit out, you have really boozy fruit left, right? We don't want to let that alcohol go to waste. So we take the fruit and we put it back into our pot still with a little water and then distill the alcohol out of the fruit. And during that process, whatever oils and compounds that were in our botanicals that the alcohol couldn't pull out, the heat from the still breaks down and pulls through in that distillate. That distillate and infusion are then used to flavor the final vodka. And so that's why our vodkas taste so fresh. We work with our farmers at the peak of freshness. They deliver all of the fruit for the year. So for example, when we do Buddha's hands, they're in season December, January. I'm in Buddha hand land during that time. And then I don't touch Buddha's hands for the rest of the year. So we do all of our infusions and distillates more seasonally like a winery, and then blend and batch them throughout the year so that we do have that fresh flavored vodka. That's the question. So Fog Point did sell very quickly. It was so popular. It is sold out almost everywhere. There's a shop located at the distillery that has a few bottles left, and as far as I know, those are the last few. The good news is that with Chris's help and our new fog farm, we're working on another expression of Fog Point. It will be a little bit different than the current one. We're collecting fog from a different area, so there may be a slightly different flavor profile there, and we're exploring what other types of wine we might be able to use as well. Any other questions, guys?
How much does the standard fog catcher cost?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, well, like I said, the materials using the FogQuest design, like the one I showed up at Sutro Tower, they use an ABS post system to hold them up, so it's relatively inexpensive, around $300. And the academics use steel posts. They're a little more expensive. Now, that's not including any measurement equipment. Usually the SFC array that I showed that Alicia had up here, it had tipping bucket rain gauges on there where they can monitor in real time how much the water is being produced. That adds another $300 or $400 per unit. So it can get expensive, but the idea is that these can be assembled by people who have few resources. So it should be relatively feasible.
As I understand it too, once we've determined an area is good for fog collection, it's very easy to put in an expensive fog collector there because they know they're going to get good fog, right?
Yeah, that's really the first step is to put a smaller one up, test it, verify, and then go larger.
So speaking about fog, and I guess there's a certain height of the fog, like it won't go past a certain altitude or whatever. Is that taken into consideration when you're making the fog collectors? Like, is there an optimal height of the fog collector that you've seen, and like the ones that are produced? Being that maybe if it's too tall, it will evaporate before it gets collected or something like that.
Yeah, well, certainly the fog collectors, both the standard fog collectors and larger collection nets, it's important to have them a couple meters off the ground because there's a boundary layer right on the ground, and there's a lot of fluid dynamics involved in fog collection, and the fluid dynamics, people say that the closer to the ground you get, the more poor the performance is. So there's that question, and generally they're usually about 2 meters off the ground, and this larger system we had, it went about 3 meters up after that. And in order to find the optimum elevation, generally you don't try and raise the fog net up to the elevation. You try and get the right height land and then just put it 2 or 3 meters up, because it's a lot easier to construct than trying to raise it really high up. But there are opportunities to install fog collectors like on rooftops, but then and those are much higher, but then you have another fluid dynamic problem where the fog hits the building and it kind of shoots over the top. So we're involved with fluid dynamics people to try and create a spoiler or something that will force the fog into the net. But that's a problem that's going to take several decades probably to solve.
I have a question. How is the vodka affected, if at all, by geographically where the fog is collected?
That's a great question. So for the fog point that we tasted today, we collected fog from a couple locations, including Berkeley, Tilden Park, Sutro Tower. We had a few collectors for a while in the Presidio. Because we were so new to collecting fog, and because we were collecting such small amounts day by day, we added them all to the same tank. So the flavor profile of the fog is how I know the flavor profile of the fog to be, and I never had the opportunity to taste the fog from different collectors separately until just recently. I'm finding that the water is very similar, but there definitely is a little bit of shift from place to place. I never thought I'd be talking about fog terroir at this point in my career, but it happens. So yes, the flavor difference is very minor, I'm finding, here in California, but I'd be really interested to see how fog water might taste different in Guatemala or Morocco than what we can get here in Northern California.
So I wanted to know if there's a way to, for you to tell us how long does it usually take for a new flavor of vodka comes off, or in this case, when you develop the FogQuest vodka, how long did this whole planning process happen from beginning to the end?
That's a great question. So when we do a lot of experimentation at the distillery, I often find myself going to the farmer's market and finding some really awesome fruit or botanical we want to play with. So there's always a sort of research, new product development time involved where we really want to dial in the vodka itself and how delicious it's going to be. Once we get to that point, there's a lot of other things involved, things like package design. The federal government has to approve our labels, things like that. So it can take quite a while to get all those things together and to get the bottling materials in and whatnot. But it does vary from product to product. Some take a lot less time to plan. Fog Point, unfortunately, took quite a while because we had the lead time to collect all this water. So it was kind of an ongoing experiment for us, and a really exciting day when we had the opportunity to actually say, here's the vodka, here it is. Go out and taste it, guys.
Yep, so the question is, what is your advice for someone interested in becoming a master distiller? What education avenues would you recommend?
That's a really awesome question because I got into distilling a little bit by mistake, if you will. I'm very lucky that I found my passion this way. I have an art degree, and it was during a gap in employment that I was looking for something fun to do and stumbled upon distilling. I was really into craft beer, so it drove me there, but I never knew how much I'd love distilling and how interesting the science of distilling would be. I'm hoping seeing more people out doing things like brewing, distilling, winemaking, drives people towards STEM a little bit more, because I think understanding science and engineering is really helpful, chemistry especially as a distiller, but there is a lot of art involved. So people from all walks of life are involved in this industry, and there's a lot that folks can contribute from anywhere. So I say if you're interested in distilling or learning to distill, just get out there and learn, read as much as you can, and involve yourself in the industry, because you never know when there's going to be a job opportunity and an opportunity to learn.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
A round of applause.
Appreciate it.